Chapter 14, The Planting of the Tree. "Well done," said Aslan in a voice that made the earth shake. Then Diggory knew that all the Narnians had heard those words, and that the story of them would be handed down from father to son in that new world for hundreds of years, perhaps forever. But he was in no danger of feeling conceited, for he didn't think about it at all now that he was face to face with Aslan. This time he found he could look straight into the lion's eyes. He had forgotten his troubles and felt absolutely content. "Well done, son of Adam," said Aslan again. "For this fruit you have hungered and thirsted and wept. No hand but yours shall sow the seed of the tree that is to be the protection of Narnia. Throw the apple toward the riverbank, where the ground is soft." And Diggory did as he was told. Everyone had grown so quiet, you could hear the soft thump where it fell into the mud. "It is well thrown," said Aslan. "Let us now proceed to the coronation of King Frank of Narnia and Helen, his queen." The children now noticed these two for the first time. They were dressed in strange and beautiful clothes, and from their shoulders rich robes flowed out behind them to where 4 dwarfs held up the king's train and 4 river nymphs the queen's. Their heads were bare, but Helen had let her hair down, and it made a great improvement over her appearance. But it was neither hair nor clothes that made them look so different from their old selves. Their faces had a new expression, especially the king's. All the sharpness and cunning and quarrelsomeness which he had picked up as a London cabby seemed to have been washed away, and the courage and kindness which he had always had were easier to see. Perhaps it was the air of the young world that had done it, or talking with Aslan, or both. "Upon my word," whispered Fledge to Polly, "my old master's been changed nearly as much as I have. Why, he's a real master now." "Yes, but don't buzz in my ear like that," said Polly. "It tickles so." "Now," said Aslan, "some of you undo the tangle which you have made with those trees, and let us see what we will find there." Diggory now saw where 4 trees grew close together. Their branches had all been laced together or tied together with switches so as to make a sort of cage. The 2 elephants with their trunks and a few dwarfs with their little axes soon got it all undone. There were 3 things inside. One was a young tree that seemed to be made of gold. The second was a young tree that seemed to be made of silver. But the third was a miserable object in muddy clothes, sitting hunched up between them. "Gosh," whispered Diggory, "it's Uncle Andrew." To explain all this, we must go back a bit. The beasts, you remember, had tried planting and watering him. When the watering brought him to his senses, he found himself soaking wet, buried up to his thighs in earth, which was quickly turning to mud, and surrounded by more wild animals than he had ever dreamed of in his life before. It is perhaps not surprising that he began to scream and howl. This was, in a way, a good thing, for it at least persuaded everyone, even the warthog, that he was alive. So they dug him up again. His trousers really were in a shocking state by now. As soon as his legs were free, he tried to bolt, but one swift curl the elephant's trunk round his waist soon put an end to that. Everyone now thought he must be safely kept somewhere till Aslan had a time to come and see him and say what should be done about him. So they made a sort of cage or coop all around him, and they offered him everything they could think of to eat. The donkey collected great piles of thistles and threw them in. Uncle Andrew didn't seem to care about them. The squirrels bombarded him with volleys of nuts, but he only covered his head with his hands and tried to keep out of the way. Several birds flew to and fro, diligently dropping worms on him. The bear was especially kind. During the afternoon he found a wild bee's nest, and instead of eating it himself, which he would have very much liked to have done, this worthy creature brought it back to Uncle Andrew. But this was in fact the worst failure of all. The bear lobbed the whole sticky mess over the top enclosure, and unfortunately it hit Uncle Andrew slap in the face, and not all the bees were dead. The bear, who would have not at all minded being hit in the face by a honeycomb himself, could not understand why Uncle Andrew staggered back, slipped, and sat down. And it was sheer bad luck that he sat down on a pile of thistles. "And anyways," as the warthog said, "quite a lot of honey has gotten into the creature's mouth, and that's bound to have done him some good." Now, they were really getting quite fond of their strange new pet, and hoped that Aslan would let them keep it. The cleverer ones were quite sure by now that at least some of the noises which came out of his mouth had meaning. They christened him Brandy, because that was the noise he made so often. In the end, however, they had to leave him there for the night. Aslan was busy all that day instructing the new king and queen and doing other important things. He could not attend to poor old Brandy. What with the nuts and pears and apples and bananas that had been thrown into him, he did fairly well for supper. But it wouldn't be true to say that he passed an agreeable night. "Bring out that creature," said Aslan. One of the elephants lifted Uncle Andrew in its trunk and laid him at the lion's feet. He was too frightened to move. "Please, Aslan," said Polly, "could you say something to unfrighten him? And then could you say something to prevent him from ever coming back here again?" "Do you think he wants to?" said Aslan. "Well, Aslan," said Polly, "he might send someone else. He's so excited about the bar off the lamppost growing into a lamppost tree, and he thinks—" "He thinks great folly, child," said Aslan. "This world is bursting with life for these few days, because the song with which I called it into life still hangs in the air, rumbles in the ground. It will not be so for long. But I cannot tell that to this old sinner, and I cannot comfort him either, for he has made himself unable to hear my voice. If I spoke to him, he would only hear growlings and roarings. Oh, Adam's sons, how cleverly you defend yourself against all that might do you good. But I will give him the only gift he is still able to receive." He bowed his great head rather sadly and breathed into the magician's terrified face. "Sleep," he said. "Sleep, and be separated for some few hours from all the torments you have devised for yourself." And Uncle Andrew immediately rolled over with closed eyes and began breathing peacefully. "Carry him aside and lay him down," said Aslan. "Now, dwarfs, show your smithcraft. Let me see you make 2 crowns for your king and queen." More dwarfs than you could dream of rushed towards the golden tree. They had all of its leaves stripped off and some of its branches torn off too before you could say Jack Robinson. And now the children could see that it did not merely look golden, but was of real soft gold. It had of course sprung up from the half-sovereigns which had fallen out of Uncle Andrew's pocket when he was turned upside down, just as the silver had grown up from the half-crowns. From nowhere, as it seemed, piles of dry brushwood for fuel, a little anvil, hammers, tongs, and a bellows were produced. Next moment, oh, how these dwarfs loved their work. The fire was blazing, the bellows were roaring, and the gold was melting, and the hammers were clinking. 2 moles, whom Aslan had set to dig, which was what they liked to do best, earlier in the day, poured out a pile of precious stones at the dwarfs' feet. Under the clever fingers of the little smiths, 2 crowns took shape. Not ugly, heavy things like modern European crowns, but light, delicate, beautifully shaped circles, which you could really wear and look nicer by wearing. The king's was set with rubies, and the queen's with emeralds. When the crowns had been cooled in the river, Aslan made Frank and Helen kneel before him and placed the crowns on their heads. Then he said, "Rise up, king and queen of Narnia, father and mother of many kings that shall be in Narnia, and the isles, and Archenland. Be just, and merciful, and brave. The blessing is upon you." Then everyone cheered, or bayed, or neighed, or trumpeted, or clapped its wings, and the royal pair stood, looking solemn and a little shy, but all the nobler for their shyness. And while Diggory was still cheering, he heard the deep voice of Aslan beside him saying, "Look." Everyone in that crowd turned its head, and then everyone drew a long breath of wonder and delight. A little way off, towering over their heads, they saw a tree which had certainly not been there before. It must have grown up silently, yet swiftly as a flag rises when you pull up a flagstaff, while they were all busied about the coronation. Its spreading branches seemed to cast a light rather than a shade, and silver apples peeped out like stars from under every leaf. But it was the smell which came from it, even more than the sight, that made everyone draw in their breath. For a moment, one could hardly think of anything else. "Son of Adam," said Aslan, "you have sown well. And you, Narnians, let it be your first care to guard this tree, for it is your shield. The witch of whom I told you has fled far away into the north of the world, and she will live on there, growing stronger in dark magic. But while that tree flourishes, she will never come down into Narnia. She dare not come within 100 miles of the tree, for its smell, which is joy and life and health to you, is death and horror and despair to her." Everyone was staring solemnly at the tree, when Aslan suddenly swung round his head, scattering golden gleams of light in his mane as he did so, and fixed his large eyes on the children. "What is it, children?" he said, for he caught them in the very act of whispering and nudging one another. "Oh, Aslan, sir," said Diggory, turning red. I forgot to tell you. The witch has already eaten one of those apples, one of the same kind that the tree grew from." He hadn't really said all he was thinking, but Polly at once said it for him. Diggory was always much more afraid than she of looking the fool. "So we thought, Aslan," she said, "that there must be some mistake and she can't really mind the smell of those apples." "Why do you think that, daughter of Eve?" asked Lion. "Well, she ate one." "Child," he replied, "that is why all the rest are now a horror to her. That is what happens to those who pluck and eat the fruits at the wrong time and in the wrong way. The fruit is good, but they loathe it ever after." "Oh, I see," said Polly. "And I suppose because she took it in the wrong way, it won't work for her. I mean, it won't make her always young and all that." "Alas," said Aslan, shaking his head, "it will. Things always work according to their nature. She has won her heart's desire. She has unwearying strength, and endless days like a goddess. But length of days with an evil heart is only length of misery, and already she begins to know it. All get what they want. They do not always like it." I nearly ate one myself, Aslan," said Diggory. "Would I?" "You would, child," said Aslan, "for the fruit always works. It must work, but it does not work happily for any who pluck it at their own will. If any Narnian unbidden had stolen an apple and planted it here to protect Narnia, it would have protected Narnia, but it would have done so by making Narnia into another strong and cruel empire like Charn, not the kindly land I mean it to be. And the witch tempted you to do another thing, my son, did she not?" "Yes, Aslan. She wanted me to take an apple home to Mother." "Understand, then, that it would have healed her, but not to your joy or hers. The day would have come for you both. She would have looked back, and it would have been better to die in that illness." And Diggory could say nothing, for tears choked him, and he gave up all hopes of saving his mother's life. But at the same time, he knew that the lion knew what would have happened, and that there might be things more terrible even than losing someone you love by death. But now, Aslan was speaking again, almost in a whisper. That is what would have happened, child, with a stolen apple. It is not what will happen now. What I give you now will bring joy. It will not in your world give endless life, but it will heal. Go, pluck her an apple from the tree. For a second, Diggory could hardly understand. It was as if the whole world had turned inside out and upside down. And then, like someone in a dream, he was walking across to the tree, and the king and queen were cheering him on, and all the creatures were cheering too. He plucked the apple and put it in his pocket. And then he came back to Aslan. Please, he said, may we go home now? He had forgotten to say thank you, but he meant it, and Aslan understood. And that's the end of chapter 14. All get what they want. They don't always like it. And what a powerful thought by Aslan for us to consider. It's the sort of thought you can think about really your whole life and never completely get all that it can mean. All get what they want. What you truly work for and desire and yearn for. But not everyone will like what they get. It's not then so much what we get or don't. Maybe it's what we desire and what we yearn for. What is at the center of our hearts? Who is at the center of our hearts? What or who do we desire and hope for and long for more than anything else? Who sits on the throne of your heart? All get what they want. But if it is not God himself who sits on the throne of our hearts, everything else, anything else, will eventually let us down and break our hearts. We may get what we think we want, but if it's something that won't last, that can't last, then ultimately, when we get what we have desired and find out that it's the wrong desire from the beginning, what if it's too late? So, what is most important? Who is most important? Jesus himself has reminded us that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. May it be God Almighty who sits on that throne right here. For not only is he the only one who can truly satisfy, it is the only desire that will never let us down.